Do I like Hulk Hogan? No, I don't. I think he's a phony piece of shit.
For years, wrestlers like Bret Hart have made it clear they can't stand Hulk Hogan. Now Vince McMahon is finally speaking up about why so many in the WWE locker room felt the same way.
In my opinion, reality doesn't suck.
Between union betrayals, racist rants, backstage manipulation, and refusing to lose, Hogan made a lot of enemies behind the scenes. Let me break it down. The foundation of hatred. The relationship between Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon is honestly one of the most complex and dysfunctional partnerships in entertainment history. McMahon once described their bond as a very close personal relationship that left him heartbroken when Hogan defected to a rival promotion. But what he didn't mention was how that relationship was built on a foundation of betrayal, manipulation, and mutual exploitation that would ultimately poison the entire wrestling industry. What makes this story even more fascinating is how McMahon has been gradually revealing the true nature of their relationship through various interviews and documentaries, particularly in the 2024 Netflix series Mr. McMahon, where he portrays Hogan as a pivotal business asset, but also a source of personal and professional frustration due to ego, betrayals, and creative clashes. McMahon describes bringing Hogan back multiple times despite disliking him personally, and there's this absolutely chilling moment in the documentary featuring a silent, tense stare-down that perfectly symbolizes their fraught dynamic. But before we get into the absolute chaos that defined their relationship, we need to talk about the foundation of why virtually every wrestler in the locker room wanted to throw hands with the so-called immortal Hulk Hogan. And spoiler alert, it's not just about wrestling moves or championship reigns. This goes way deeper, and it's honestly kind of dark. Picture this. It's 1986, and professional wrestling is absolutely exploding in popularity. WrestleMania 2 is on the horizon, and behind the scenes, wrestlers are dealing with some seriously messed up working conditions. We're talking about independent contractors with zero health benefits, no insurance, and getting their bodies absolutely destroyed night after night with no safety net whatsoever. Enter Jesse the Body Ventura. Yes, the same guy who would later become governor of Minnesota, who had the absolutely revolutionary idea that maybe, just maybe, wrestlers deserve basic human rights like health insurance and fair pay. Ventura attempted to organize wrestlers into a union for better pay, health benefits, and protections because apparently asking for health care when your job involves getting body slammed through tables was considered radical back then. Now here's where it gets absolutely wild, and this is where Hulk Hogan's reputation took its first major L that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Instead of supporting his fellow wrestlers, people he supposedly called brothers, Hogan decided to be the ultimate corporate snitch. Hogan, fearing it would disrupt his lucrative position, informed McMahon directly. The level of betrayal here is absolutely staggering, but what makes it even more insidious is how McMahon used this information. McMahon's 1991 deposition confirmed, "Hulk Hogan told me about Ventura's union efforts," and McMahon immediately moved to crush the initiative with threats of terminations. The consequences were devastating. McMahon threatened terminations and killed the initiative, and to this day, WWE still lacks a union, which has continued to exacerbate injury issues for wrestlers. Ventura later revealed the full extent of Hogan's backstabbing, and the numbers make it even more insulting. That was stunning to me because I thought he was my friend, but then I realized why during the court case, we got the payoff for WrestleMania 3, and Hogan made more money than all the rest of us combined, including Andre. Can you imagine? While everyone else was scraping by and risking their health with zero protection, Hogan was out here making more money than the entire WrestleMania 3 roster combined. That's not just greed, that's a level of selfishness that's honestly hard to comprehend. And McMahon was completely complicit in this arrangement, using Hogan as his inside man to maintain control over the roster.
Well, if I'm making twice as much money as you and you're wrestling me, is that a work? That's a f***ing shoot, brother. This business was a shoot. It was the man that made the most money.
This mentality explains everything about their relationship. While other wrestlers were focused on putting on great matches, telling compelling stories, and elevating the entire industry, Hogan and McMahon were solely focused on maximizing their own profits at everyone else's expense. That kind of symbiotic selfishness creates a toxic environment where collaboration becomes impossible. But the union situation was just the tip of the iceberg when it came to Hogan's backstage politics and McMahon's willingness to enable them. This man had creative control clauses in his contracts that essentially made him the unofficial booker of his own storylines, and he used that power in the most toxic ways imaginable, always with McMahon's blessing, as long as it made money. Let's talk about WrestleMania 9th in 1993, which wrestling fans still consider one of the most insulting moments in WWE history. Hogan persuaded McMahon to alter the finish, winning the title from Yokozuna post Bret Hart's match, robbing Hart of a proper moment. Bret Hart, one of the most technically gifted wrestlers of all time, had just put on a clinic against Yokozuna, and instead of getting his moment to shine, Hogan swooped in like a vulture and stole the spotlight with McMahon's full approval. Bret Hart's reaction to this whole situation was absolutely savage, and honestly, completely justified. Hart called it a black eye and said, "Do I like Hulk Hogan? No." From the video transcripts we've seen, Hart was even more brutal in his assessment.
Do I like Hulk Hogan? No, I don't. I think he's a phony piece of shit.
Now that's what I call keeping it 100. Hart didn't hold back, and honestly, who could blame him? When you've dedicated your entire life to perfecting your craft, only to have some politically savvy veteran swoop in and steal your thunder with the boss's permission, that's going to leave some serious scars. The backstage politics got even worse when Hogan made his way to WCW in the mid-90s, and this is where McMahon's true feelings about their relationship started to surface in Monster. Even established veterans like Shawn Michaels got fed up with Hogan's demands. At SummerSlam 2005, Michaels was so frustrated with Hogan's backstage politics that he decided to make a statement in the most petty way possible by overselling every single move Hogan hit him with, making the match look absolutely ridiculous. And where was McMahon during all this? Probably backstage wondering how he was going to manage yet another Hogan-created crisis.
Vince McMahon pulls me in his office. He says, "Listen, next pay-per-view, you're wrestling Hulk Hogan, and you're gonna make him tap out." I said, "This is great, Vince." Hogan comes over, sits in a chair, and beforehand, Vince tells me, when Hogan sits down, "I want you to get right up in his face. I want your nose this close to his nose."
This Kurt Angle story perfectly illustrates the kind of psychological games McMahon had to play just to get Hogan to do basic professional wrestling things like losing matches. The fact that McMahon had to orchestrate elaborate intimidation tactics just to convince his biggest star to do his job shows how dysfunctional their relationship had become. Even legendary wrestlers from previous generations couldn't stand what Hogan represented, and McMahon knew it. Bruno Sammartino, widely considered one of the greatest champions in wrestling history, had some absolutely scathing things to say about the Hulkster. "I was never a fan of Hogan because I was never impressed with his quality of performance in the ring. A lot of people thought he was a great draw, but in reality, he really wasn't." Coming from Bruno Sammartino, that's not just criticism, that's a complete destruction of Hogan's legacy. Sammartino held the WWE Championship for over 11 years, combined across 2 reigns, and he built his reputation on pure wrestling ability and genuine connection with the audience. For him to say that Hogan wasn't even a legitimate draw, that's absolutely devastating, and it's something McMahon had to deal with internally while publicly promoting Hogan as his golden boy. What really set Hogan apart from other wrestlers and what made his relationship with McMahon so complex was his obsession with money over everything else. McMahon understood this and used it to his advantage, but it also created a monster that would eventually turn on him. The wrestling community's opinion on Hogan hasn't improved at all over the years. Modern stars like CM Punk have been vocal about their disdain for Hogan's approach to the business. CM Punk mocked Hogan's ego and money-driven attitude in his famous 2011 pipe bomb promo, and even current AEW star MJF has called Hogan out directly, saying, "Because he's a liar and a racist." The fact that wrestlers from different generations, from the 1980s all the way to today, have the same complaints about Hogan tells you everything you need to know about the environment McMahon created by enabling his behavior. This isn't just a case of a few disgruntled employees. This is a pattern of behavior that spans decades and was facilitated by McMahon's business-first mentality. So when we look at why wrestlers hate Hulk Hogan, it's not just about jealousy or professional rivalry. It's about a fundamental betrayal of the brotherhood that's supposed to exist in professional wrestling, enabled and encouraged by McMahon's business model. It's about choosing personal profit over collective progress. It's about using political maneuvering to stay on top instead of elevating others, with the full support of the man running the company. The scandals that shattered everything. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off immediately, because this is the moment that transformed the McMahon-Hogan relationship from complicated business partnership to full-blown crisis management. In 2015, the wrestling universe was absolutely shaken to its core when a leaked sex tape showed Hogan using the N-word and expressing bias against his daughter dating black men. But here's what most people don't realize. McMahon's immediate response revealed everything about their relationship dynamic. The transcripts revealed Hogan saying things like, "I am a racist to a point," which shows a level of conscious bigotry that's honestly stomach-turning. But McMahon's reaction wasn't shock or surprise. It was pure damage control mode. WWE fired him immediately, removing him from the Hall of Fame in games like WWE 2K. But here's the kicker. McMahon didn't consult Hogan before demanding his resignation via Triple H, which Hogan found hurtful after decades together. This cold corporate response after decades of partnership shows you everything about how McMahon operates. Loyalty only flows one way, and the moment you become a liability, you're disposable. But what's even more telling is how quickly McMahon moved to rehabilitate Hogan once the heat died down. WWE reinstated Hogan in 2018, inducting him back into the Hall of Fame, showing that McMahon's moral stance was really just about protecting the WWE brand. The wrestling community's reaction was absolutely savage, and rightfully so. MVP called him out directly, saying Hogan is a racist. And this wasn't just some random accusation. This was coming from someone who had witnessed the culture McMahon and Hogan created in the industry. But the racism scandal was just the tip of the iceberg when it came to McMahon's willingness to enable Hogan's worst behavior. Let's rewind to the early 1990s, when Hogan was dealing with the steroid scandal that would define their relationship for decades to come. During the federal trial against WWE owner Vince McMahon for steroid distribution, Hogan testified under immunity and admitted to long-term steroid use, completely contradicting his public image as a clean living inspiration for children. But here's the fascinating part. McMahon had actually warned Hogan about lying publicly about steroid use. McMahon had warned Hogan, don't lie about it, but Hogan did, later calling it a horrible decision. This shows that McMahon was aware of the problem, but was willing to let Hogan continue deceiving the public, including children, as long as it protected the business. The level of deception here was absolutely mind-blowing, and McMahon was complicit every step of the way. For years, Hogan had been telling kids to train hard, say your prayers, and eat your vitamins, while secretly pumping his body full of performance-enhancing drugs, and McMahon was perfectly content to let this charade continue because it was making money. When federal prosecutors indicted McMahon for distributing steroids through WWF Dr. George Zahorian in 1993, the relationship between McMahon and Hogan reached its breaking point. Hogan, granted immunity, testified in July 1994 that he had used steroids since 1976, over 13 years, but that McMahon never sold them illegally or coerced him. This testimony helped acquit McMahon, but it came at a massive cost to their relationship. Hogan felt pressured by the government, fearing 17 years in prison if he didn't testify, and later said, "The government wanted me to be their star witness. If I didn't say what they wanted to hear, the target would be directed to me." From McMahon's perspective, this was the ultimate betrayal. Here was his biggest star, who he had made wealthy beyond imagination, turning state's evidence to save his own skin. But from Hogan's perspective, McMahon had put him in an impossible position by creating an environment where steroid use was normalized and then letting him take the public heat for it. The aftermath of the steroid trial reveals everything about their twisted dynamic. Hogan left WWF in 1993 amid the scandal, citing reduced pushes and steroid stigma, but McMahon's bitterness about the situation would last for years. McMahon saw it as a betrayal, especially since Hogan's admissions fueled media scrutiny. This period also exposed another layer of their relationship, McMahon's willingness to sacrifice anyone, including his biggest star, to protect himself. When the O got too intense, McMahon was perfectly willing to let Hogan take the fall, but he expected Hogan to do it quietly and without implicating the company. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of their relationship came during Hogan's departure to WCW in 1994. Hogan's June 1994 defection to WCW, WWF's rival, was a personal blow to McMahon. McMahon felt abandoned, and his reaction in the Netflix documentary is absolutely fascinating to watch.
Well, I tell you, Mr. McMahon, the future of Hulkamania is so exciting, I really don't know how to express myself.
Looking back at interviews from this period, you can see the tension even in their scripted interactions. There's an underlying current of mistrust and manipulation that's honestly uncomfortable to watch. McMahon felt abandoned, saying in Mr. McMahon, "I took him and made a huge star out of him. Then he decides he wants to flip to our competition. It broke my heart." But what McMahon doesn't acknowledge is how his own behavior, the enablement, the exploitation, the willingness to throw Hogan under the bus when convenient, contributed to that betrayal. During Hogan's WCW years, McMahon's true feelings about their relationship became increasingly apparent. Hogan signed a lucrative deal, turned heel in 1996 to form the NWO, and helped WCW win the Monday Night Wars ratings battle for 83 weeks. This era intensified their rivalry, with WWF nearly going bankrupt before rebounding with the Attitude Era. But here's where it gets really interesting. McMahon's response to losing Hogan wasn't just professional competition, it was personal vindictiveness. The way McMahon portrayed WCW, and especially Hogan during this period, was absolutely vicious, showing that he took the defection as a personal betrayal rather than just a business decision. When Hogan eventually returned to WWE in 2002, after McMahon bought WCW, their relationship dynamic had fundamentally changed. Hogan returned to WWE in 2002 after McMahon bought WCW, initially as a heel but turning face. But now McMahon held all the cards, and he wasn't shy about using his power. Their on-screen feud that peaked at WrestleMania 19, 2003, was more than just entertainment. It was McMahon working out his personal issues with Hogan in front of a live audience. Their on-screen feud peaked at WrestleMania 19, 2003, a street fight where Hogan defeated McMahon in a bloody match symbolizing their real tensions. McMahon even tried to kill Hulkamania by booking Hogan to lose relevance, showing how their personal animosity was affecting creative decisions.
I enjoyed it when Undertaker was dragging you behind your very own motorcycle like you were just a great big bag of roadkill. What a sick man.
The viciousness in McMahon's promos during this period was absolutely unhinged. This wasn't just heel work, this was personal. Hogan quit in 2003 over creative frustrations, showing that their working relationship remained toxic even after their supposed reconciliation. McMahon's need to control and diminish Hogan was stronger than his desire to make money, which tells you everything about how personal their conflict had become. The family drama that exploded during the 2000s also revealed how McMahon handled personal scandals involving his top stars. After 24 years of marriage, Linda filed for divorce amid allegations of Hogan's infidelity, including an affair with their daughter Brooke's best friend, Christiane Plant. Throughout this entire public meltdown, McMahon remained notably silent, neither supporting nor condemning Hogan. The tragedy with Hogan's son Nick provided another test of their relationship. Nick, then 17, crashed a car while racing, severely injuring passenger John Graziano, who requires lifelong care due to brain damage. Leaked jail calls revealed Hogan making insensitive comments, like suggesting the crash was God's will. McMahon's response to this tragedy was telling. He distanced WWE from the situation while quietly maintaining his business relationship with Hogan. This pattern of compartmentalizing personal scandals while protecting business interests would define how McMahon handled every major Hogan controversy. He returned in 2005 for the Hall of Fame, and matches like SummerSlam 2005 versus Shawn Michaels, and even during this period, you could see the underlying tension. Shawn Michaels' overselling during their SummerSlam match wasn't just about Hogan. It was also a statement about McMahon's willingness to enable Hogan's political maneuvering. The Gawker sex tape lawsuit that eventually exposed Hogan's racist comments also revealed interesting details about McMahon's knowledge of Hogan's private behavior. A 2007 sex tape surfaced showing Hogan with Heather Clem, wife of his friend Bubba the Love Sponge, who allegedly filmed it without consent. While Hogan eventually won his lawsuit against Gawker, winning $140 million in damages, settled for $31 million, funded by Peter Thiel, not McMahon, despite rumors. McMahon's lack of public support during this period spoke volumes. The wrestling community's response to all these scandals was swift and unforgiving, and McMahon found himself in the impossible position of defending the indefensible. Scott Steiner, never one to mince words, had this to say: "Now does everybody believe me that Hogan is a piece of S?" The fact that wrestlers were openly celebrating Hogan's downfall shows how toxic the environment had become. But perhaps the most damaging aspect of McMahon's relationship with Hogan was how it set precedents for the entire industry. By consistently choosing profits over principles, by enabling toxic behavior as long as it made money, and by protecting stars who generated revenue regardless of their personal conduct, McMahon created a culture that prioritized short-term gains over long-term integrity. Modern wrestlers have been vocal about this legacy. MJF called Hogan a liar and a racist in interviews, showing that even wrestlers who never worked directly with either McMahon or Hogan understood the toxic culture they had created together. The fact that wrestlers from completely different eras all have consistent complaints about the final betrayals and death of a toxic partnership. By 2014, Hogan was back as a WWE ambassador, which seemed like the perfect redemption story. The prodigal son returning home, bygones being bygones, two old warriors putting aside their differences for the good of the business. But anyone paying attention could see that this reconciliation was purely transactional. McMahon needed Hogan's star power for events and nostalgia pops, while Hogan needed McMahon's platform to remain relevant and continue earning money from his past glory. The facade of their renewed partnership was completely shattered in 2015 with the racism scandal. But what's really telling is how McMahon handled the situation. This wasn't the reaction of a shocked friend discovering disturbing behavior from someone he trusted. This was the calculated response of a businessman protecting his brand. McMahon didn't consult Hogan before demanding his resignation via Triple H, which Hogan found hurtful after decades together. Think about that for a moment. After decades of partnership, through all the betrayals and reconciliations, McMahon couldn't even be bothered to have a direct conversation with Hogan about his firing. He sent Triple H to do his dirty work, treating Hogan like any other disposable employee rather than someone who had helped build his empire. That cold corporate response tells you everything about what their relationship had really become. But here's where it gets even more revealing: McMahon's willingness to bring Hogan back once the heat died down. WWE reinstated Hogan in 2018, inducting him back into the Hall of Fame and featuring him at events like Crown Jewel 2018 and WrestleMania 37. McMahon, quote, "S willingness to bring Hogan back once the heat died down." WWE reinstated Hogan in 2018, inducting him back into the Hall of Fame and featuring him at events like Crown Jewel 2018 and WrestleMania 37, 2021. This decision exposed the complete hollowness of McMahon's moral stance. He wasn't actually offended by Hogan's racism. He was just protecting the WWE brand until it became profitable to associate with Hogan again. The wrestling community saw right through this calculated rehabilitation. When Hogan made his returns, he was consistently met with mixed reactions at best and often outright hostility. Post-2015, Hogan faced boos upon returns, like at WrestleMania, showing that fans understood what McMahon was really doing, prioritizing nostalgia revenue over genuine accountability. What makes this period even more fascinating is how both men continued to create new controversies that tested their business relationship. Hogan's political alignments became increasingly problematic for WWE's brand. Hogan endorsed Donald Trump, spoke at the 2024 RNC, and appeared at rallies, often making inflammatory statements that put McMahon in uncomfortable positions. He joked about body-slamming Kamala Harris, mocking her heritage, which drew accusations of racism and misogyny. McMahon found himself once again in the position of having to manage Hogan's public image while trying to maintain WWE's corporate relationships and sponsorship deals. Even more telling was the beer company scandal that showed Hogan's racism wasn't just old recordings. Promoting his Real American beer, Hogan allegedly fired Ambassador Essence Genai after learning she was black, replacing her with white influencers. This incident proved that Hogan's 2018 apology was completely meaningless, and it put McMahon in the awkward position of being associated with someone who was still actively discriminating based on race. Throughout all of this, McMahon's response was telling. He maintained plausible deniability while quietly distancing WWE from Hogan's non-wrestling activities. Hogan signed a 5-year Legends deal in 2023 for merchandising and appearances, but notably, this deal was structured to limit Hogan's public appearances and speaking opportunities, showing that McMahon was trying to monetize Hogan's legacy while minimizing his ability to create new controversies. The final phase of their relationship was perhaps the most honest. Both men openly acknowledged that their partnership was purely transactional. Hogan praised the different post-McMahon WWE under Nick Khan, essentially admitting that his relationship with McMahon had become strained beyond repair. Meanwhile, McMahon reportedly didn't care about Hogan's returns in later years, viewing him as outdated. This mutual indifference was probably the most honest their relationship had ever been. Neither man was pretending to care about the other's well-being or success. They were simply using each other for whatever remaining value could be extracted from their shared history. The wrestling community's perspective on their relationship during this final period was absolutely savage. Social media allowed wrestlers and fans to express their true feelings without corporate filter, and the consensus was overwhelmingly negative. X posts tied Hogan's controversies to his political alignments. Hulk Hogan was a racist anti-union scab. That's why he loved Donald Trump, connecting decades of selfish behavior to his final political evolution. Modern wrestlers were even more direct in their criticism. Beyond the quotes we mentioned earlier, wrestlers from across different promotions and generations consistently expressed the same sentiment, that the McMahon-Hogan partnership had created a toxic culture in wrestling that prioritized politics and profit over talent and respect. The end came suddenly with Hogan's death on July 24, 2025, from cardiac arrest at age 71. McMahon's response to this moment perfectly encapsulated their entire relationship: hollow, calculated, and completely divorced from any genuine emotion. Following Hogan's reported death on July 24, 2025, from cardiac arrest at age 71, McMahon released a statement on X praising him. "The world lost a treasure today. Hulk Hogan was the greatest WWE superstar of all time, someone who was loved and admired around the world." This tribute is honestly one of the most disingenuous public statements you'll ever read. After decades of mutual betrayal, exploitation, and barely concealed animosity, McMahon suddenly proclaimed Hogan the greatest WWE superstar of all time. McMahon, who had been silent amid his own scandals, posted, "Despite our ups and downs, Hulk was a brother," which is absolutely wild considering how he treated Hogan during their actual relationship. The wrestling community's reaction to this tribute was swift and brutal. Fans and wrestlers immediately called out the hypocrisy, pointing out that McMahon had spent years distancing himself from Hogan and had reportedly shown complete indifference to his later career. Post-Death X notes irony. Vince and Hogan had beef, but Vince revolutionized with him, capturing the complicated legacy of their partnership. What makes McMahon's tribute even more hollow is how it completely ignores the reality of their relationship's impact on the wrestling industry. Obituaries highlighted their love-hate dynamic, with Hogan's anti-union actions and scandals casting shadows, but McMahon's statement pretended none of that history existed. The final irony is that McMahon's tribute actually served to highlight everything that was wrong with their relationship. By praising Hogan as universally loved and admired, McMahon was essentially gaslighting the entire wrestling community about decades of documented problems. It was one final act of corporate spin, treating a complex and problematic legacy as if it were a simple success story. Real-time social media reactions to Hogan's death and McMahon's tribute revealed the true state of their legacy. Headlines noted, "Everyone hated Hulk Hogan when he died. He had one person to blame." And the overwhelming sentiment was that McMahon's tribute was too little, too late, and completely disconnected from reality. The wrestling industry is still dealing with the cultural damage created by their partnership, the precedents they set, that politics matters more than talent, that profits justify any behavior, that loyalty only flows one way, continue to influence how wrestling companies operate today. Their legacy isn't just the matches they created or the money they made, it's the toxic culture they normalized and the countless wrestlers whose careers and lives were damaged by their selfish approach to business. Thanks for joining me. Click on the screen for more thrilling videos.